What does your book contribute to the field of diplomatic studies?
Well, I think the book makes three important contributions to the field of diplomatic studies. One has to do with providing a more integrative framework for thinking about diplomacy. A lot of books out there, some of them focus primarily on the theory of diplomacy, some others focus primarily on practice. What we do in our book is basically to bring these two fields together. So we follow closely theoretical debates in the literature, but at the same time we anchor them in case study discussions of diplomatic practices. So that's one contribution. The second one has to do with bridging another divide between international relations and diplomatic theory. This is a much overdue exercise, and we try to do this in the book by teasing out the diplomatic content from various international relations theory, like realism, like liberalism, like constructivism, and to use this insight for making sense of how diplomats make decisions, make relations, and ultimately make the world. And the third contribution, which I think is the most original, has to do with the question of ethics, which is a field that has been much overlooked in diplomatic studies. What we do in the book is to ask not only how diplomats behave and how they interact, but also how they should and how they ought to conduct relations with other parties, how diplomacy should evolve, and how diplomacy should change the world for the better. So these three contributions in terms of bridging the divide between theory and practice, between IR and diplomacy, and also the question of ethics are, I think, the key contribution of our book.
What cutting-edge areas of diplomatic research would you encourage students to pay closer attention to?
I think one of them really revolves around communication. So we define diplomacy in terms of communication, a particularly institutionalized form of communication. And if we think about the whole revolutions in terms of telecommunications, then there are many, many more opportunities now to communicate, many, many, many more channels to communicate, oftentimes much more faster than in the past. And to focus on communication, I think that's a very, very important theme that we have throughout the book. It also ties in with another theme, that's the adaptability of diplomacy. Early on in the book, we write about the origins of diplomacy, and we trace it on to the new diplomacy, Woodrow Wilson and so on, up to global diplomacy. And so diplomacy is really a very, very, very old institution, and despite all these changes in world politics, towards the state, the nation states, the League of Nations, United Nations, now to global governance, diplomacy has been around and it has successfully adapted over time, obviously with some problems, but it has overall successfully adapted.
If I may add something to what you said, Markus, I think another cutting-edge area that could inspire students and also academics to pursue in their research is the relationship between the technology and diplomacy. We live now in an age of fast technological development. An example I keep giving my students is that 15 years ago, faxes were the latest technological innovation, lots of application in diplomacy. Nowadays, nobody uses faxes anymore. So this kind of relation between technology, I think, provides a very fertile ground for research. And I think there are two particular areas that deserve attention. One has to do with the question of real-time diplomacy. Technology accelerates the way in which diplomacy takes place and put pressure on diplomats to react in real time. So that's one area. The second aspect is about the democratization of the profession. Diplomacy used to be a very elitist profession. Nowadays, technology changes that dynamic. It brings new people it encourages people to take interest in diplomatic affairs, and social media empowers people to do exactly this kind of engagement or interaction.
Where do you go from here? What publication plans you have for the near future?
We still have quite a few. So there's one of them is we've been approached by Routledge to do a new edition. So we want to expand upon a few things, want to update a lot of things. The updating is always a big challenge with diplomacy because so many things are changing. So in our book, for instance, we have something about Assange in there, but not about Snowden. But it's too recent. Then we also have a book series with Routledge called New Diplomacy. And a couple of really exciting books already have come out in this series. A couple of them are going to come out very soon. Just to highlight perhaps some of them, there's I think a really fantastic book on Iraq, weapon inspections in Iraq. What went wrong, what were the successes, what were the failures. There's a very interesting book on Iran coming out. We have something on para-diplomacy.
Exactly. So, and a few other chapters, a few other manuscripts are now under review or in preparation for publication. Some of them dealing with e-diplomacy or digital diplomacy. Another one dealing with the question of secret diplomacy. And there are a few others that seems to go in the direction that we hope to achieve, which is basically to make this book series the premier book series for diplomatic studies with Routledge.
You can think about innovation and diplomacy, because tying in again with what we said about communication and how communication has been revolutionized, it also has revolutionized diplomacy. So we have to think about diplomacy differently, we also have to study it differently. And that's definitely what we want to do both with the textbook and in the book series.
Thank you.